Hi guys, welcome back to my Patreon where every single week you can tune in and get exclusive content. Not only that, but you can also message me anytime and receive a response within 24 hours if you are on the higher tier. So in this week's episode, what I'm going to do is outline whether or not you should stay or leave a relationship. A lot of people will come to me and they'll ask me in my one-to-one sessions, they'll say, okay, should I stay? Should I leave? I don't know what to do. Now, it's never that easy. You might think you know, and you'll come to me and then I'll give you a completely different perspective and you might change your mind. So usually people are really, really unsure. There is no real kind of yes or no answer to this. Sometimes some people come to me and they're just hoping that their partner cheats or does something extreme so that they can just end the relationship. They just don't know how they're feeling. So instead of telling you whether or not you should stay or leave, usually what I do with my clients is I ask them a set of questions. And in these set of questions, by answering these questions, they'll be able to understand whether or not this relationship is for them or is this not for them. Okay? So the first question I always ask my clients if they're thinking about whether or not to leave their relationship is, do you like the person you are within this relationship, or do you prefer the person you are outside of the relationship? If you find that this relationship has turned you into a person that you no longer like or respect, so you are no longer able to control your mouth, you're no longer able to control your urges, you are miserable, you are rude, you're disrespectful, you are entitled and greedy, but you're not like that outside of the relationship, and you're not like that with other people, then what that suggests is either you should leave the relationship because this person's bringing out the worst in you, or you should leave the relationship because you are not kind to the people who are closest to you. You are only capable of being kind to people who are at an emotional distance. And therefore, it's not fair on the person that tries to connect to you because for some reason, and due to unresolved trauma or unresolved issues or unresolved insecurities, they seem to become your punching bag. And that's not fair on them. So either or is not a good sign. Whereas if you are somebody who is, very capable outside of the relationship, but when you're in this relationship, you make better decisions. You spend, better money. You don't spend your money waste it as much. You are better with your weight and your health. You sleep better. Your life just generally seems calmer and more peaceful when in the relationship than when outside of it. It's probably a healthy relationship and one that you should try and work on if you have issues rather than resorting back to your old life. Okay, so that's the first question I ask people to ask themselves whether or not they should stay or leave. The next question I would say to ask yourself whether or not to stay or leave a relationship is, how attractive do you feel in this relationship? Now, of course, if you've been together for years and years, you don't really expect to feel like a supermodel every single day. But do you feel like you are somewhat invisible? Do you feel like your partner is capable of showing attraction to other people? Do you feel like you have to beg for physical intimacy, either just affection or actual intimacy from your partner? If those things are starting to take place, the reason why that's a bit of a red flag and why that's an indicator of the demise of a relationship is, unfortunately, when the attraction disappears, your ability to resolve conflict as a couple disappears. What will happen is, instead of resolving the conflict and, getting back to being intimate and connected, you might just resolve the conflict by, cooking and eating together and going, like, dropping each other to work or whatever it is. It doesn't actually restore intimacy. Of course, it's not the end of the world if that happens, but you might want to be mindful of this when deciding whether or not you should stay or leave. The next question I ask my clients when they are thinking about whether in staying in a relationship or ending it is, I ask them this very simple question. If this person stays exactly the same and potentially gets to 20% worse, would you be able to tolerate them? The answer is, actually, you know what, their baseline level of behavior is actually very good. And if they got 10 or 20% worse because of kids and because of like stress or whatever it is, I could cope with that. It's not the end of the world. But if you're hanging in by a thread and you are barely with the person for who they are now, and if they even got a percentile worse, you don't know if you'd be able to handle it. Last thing you should be doing is cementing your commitment. I'll have couples that will start to get married, but before they're getting married, they're like, okay, I need him to change, endless stuff. And if they get any worse with this, I won't be able to do it, but we need to get married. No, don't make those decisions. Don't cement your foundation of your relationship when you couldn't tolerate them getting a minute worse, or you wouldn't tolerate them getting a single percentile worse. So only be with somebody who, if they got 10 to 20% worse than who they are today, you could marry them and be relatively happy. You might not be ecstatic that they got worse, but you could be okay. The mistake people make is they assume people are going to get better or things are going to get better. The better thing to do is for people to get worse and ask yourself, can I tolerate this? If they get 10% worse, 20% worse, can I tolerate it? If the answer is yes, perfect. If the answer is no way, then don't plan for an imaginary outcome of positive improvements. It's not going to happen. Okay? If you are really undecided about whether or not to stay or leave in a relationship, just imagine two scenarios. Imagine, okay, if I stay with them in 10 years' time and they are exactly who they are, what would my life look like? Worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is they might get a bit worse. Worst case scenario, whatever financial issues might get worse, whatever intimacy issues might get worse. Worst case scenario, everything is the way it is, but a bit worse. And then you ask yourself, what would be worst case scenario if I leave them? Now, if worst case scenario when you leave them is that you would be very lonely, you wouldn't be able to find somebody else, you wouldn't be able to move on, you would miss them too much, you wouldn't know how to divide the kids. Whichever worst case scenario you can handle, pick that one. Pick whichever pain you can handle. If the worst case scenario of separating from them is far better than the worst case scenario of staying with them, then pick whichever pain you can handle. So what I mean by that is if I pick a person and I'm staying with them, but I know that forever it means that we're going to have intimacy issues, or forever they might cheat on me, or forever they might be verbally abusive, but I can handle that over forever being a bit lonely, or forever not meeting somebody else, or forever being in the same scenario again, then it's fair enough. But if I can't handle it, don't do it. Pick the better problem. Another question I ask my clients, whether they're thinking to stay or leave, is what is the consensus about your relationship and your partner? Now, we live in an individualistic society where everybody's just like, as long as you're happy, that's all that matters. As long as you're happy, blah, blah. It's just not true and it's not practical. People can see things objectively while you are subjective when you're immersed with somebody. When you're really in love with somebody, you become subjective. You see things that, other people can't see. But more so than anything, you lose sight of their character because you are clouded by your infatuation. They might have a really difficult character, but because you love them or because you're attracted to them, you can't see it. Now, the better thing to do is ask friends and family of their genuine opinion. Now, if the common consensus is he or she is a great person, then worst case scenario, this person's character is quite good. They could, they obviously could change and anything can happen, but on the whole, you sought a consensus before committing to that person. But if people who are very close to you and really care about you and are objective and reasonable, not unreasonable people, but reasonable people, say to you again and again, they're not sure on this person, believe them. Believe them. It always comes back to this. Whenever I have a client who's going through a divorce or problems, I always ask, what did your mum think of this person? What did your dad think? What did your friends think? If you say, oh, my mum's toxic, so she doesn't count, or my dad's a narcissist, so he doesn't count. Okay, what about your friends? You have nobody in your life that has an objective opinion on your life? Seek some consensus, because it's really important. If somebody's hated by everybody, you will soon learn why. Now, the next question to ask yourself of whether or not you should stay or leave is, are the problems I'm facing today a common problem I've faced in the past? What I mean by this is this partner and the relationship you're having brand new, the problems that you're coming across? Or is this a common theme in previous relationships where people have pointed out this flaw again and again in you? And this is just history repeating itself. If you find that the problems you're having with your partner are ones that you've had previously, then the problem is not necessarily in the relationship, it's in your relationship skills and things that you haven't improved. And as a result, you've just changed the person rather than changing your behavior. And you're now questioning this relationship when really you should be questioning your ability to maintain relationships. Whereas if previous relationships have been very healthy, they ended because of circumstances, it was nothing too toxic, but this relationship feels really unhealthy, this relationship feels very unfamiliar, this relationship feels very toxic, then there's something in the relationship that you should reconsider and you should potentially leave. So try and figure out your patterns in this. The next and probably the most important question to ask yourself of whether or not you should stay or leave is ask yourself, do we have the same intimacy needs? Do we match each other in terms of emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, and intellectual intimacy? If you match in terms of emotional intimacy, what that looks like is they understand that I need a hug sometimes when I'm feeling low and they're happy to give it. Or I understand that, they are really tired after a long day and they don't want me to be speaking to them. They'd rather just wait and have a coffee ready and then they'll speak to me. We understand each other's emotions. Or he understands my need, she understands my physical needs, that I need physical intimacy 2-3 times a week, a month, whatever it is. And she understands it and she gets it and she tries her best to meet my needs, or he tries my best. Do we understand each other's physical, emotional, and intellectual needs, and are we in line in that? If the answer is no, whenever I want a hug, he doesn't want it, or whenever I want physical intimacy, she doesn't want it, or whenever I want to talk about work or talk about something serious, she's not interested, or whenever I want to talk about anything else, there's a complete lack of intellectual, emotional, and physical intimacy, or even if it's not a lack, it's in opposite directions. If that is happening, then unfortunately the relationship is less likely to last a long time anyway. You might just be prolonging the breakup. So ask yourself, are we in line in terms of our needs? So my overall advice is, whenever it comes to asking whether you should stay or leave, it's not so much about what they've done, it's more about reflecting on these factors. And if the answer is relatively positive, you should stay. And just fight for it, because the grass isn't always greener. If the answers to these questions are all negative, then perhaps reconsider staying in this relationship.